This past Tuesday marked the final vote for the midterm elections. And even though the votes for the midterm elections are going to be counted for weeks and months to come at this point, that doesn't stop the fact that this officially marks the beginning of the 2020 election season, and we're going to be campaigning for that election season already. And we're starting to see a lot of that start to formulate already. We would be remiss if we started talking about campaign season without looking back at one of the most historic campaigns of my lifetime and possibly lifetimes before me. The campaign and eventual election of political outsider Donald Trump. It's important to look at Donald Trump's candidacy and his campaign because we need to look back at the promises that he's made and he's kept. He's lowered taxes. He's tried to make the United States a more business-friendly place. He's tried to rein in spending, even though he's been stopped at every point he could. And finally, he did put in a very important effort to try and repeal the Affordable Care Act, even though that was stalled in the legislation. There is, however, one big campaign promise that has gone unfulfilled at this point. And I understand why it's gone unfulfilled. It's been almost impossible to secure the funding for the project that's been proposed, even with Republicans controlling both houses of Congress at the beginning of the presidential term. It's still been almost impossible to appropriate the funding. Congress has not been able to pass a budget and has instead continued to push omnibus spending packages, and these spending packages have made it hard to appropriate funding for government projects. And the project that I'm talking to is, of course, the great and glorious wall that we were promised.
So, I think we need the wall. We're going to build the wall. We have no choice.
Number one, are you ready? Are you ready? We will build a great wall along the southern border.
We're going to have strong, incredible borders, and people are going to come into our country, but they're going to come into our country legally. They're going to come in legally. We're going to build a wall. It's going to be built.
One of the main focuses of the Trump campaign was putting an end to illegal immigration and all of the previous administration's policies that had helped illegal immigration stay in place and even be rewarded in some cases. That was part of the reason that he promised us this great and glorious wall. Even though it was going to be a costly venture, he did assure us that Mexico was going to pay for this wall.
We will build a great wall along the southern border. And Mexico will pay for the wall.
Now, there were Trump faithful and Trump bashers alike that both came out and assumed that when Trump was saying this, he meant that Mexico was going to write us a great big check and they were going to finance the funding for the wall. But the majority of us out here who are in the middle, and especially a lot of people who are in alternative media, knew right from the top that this was not going to be a case of Mexico rolling out the checkbook and paying for the wall. On every aspect coming into it, the government that was in place in Mexico was actually not really friendly to the wall. You can cite Razor Fist's video on why we need the wall if you want an explanation as to why the government in Mexico would like unchecked illegal immigration to come into the United States. I'll link that in the description below. While the checkbook wasn't going to come out for the wall, Mexico was going to be slated to be paying for the wall in more economic means. Obviously, Mexican smugglers were not going to be able to smuggle their product into the United States as easily as they could have before there was a wall in place. And the revamp of NAFTA, the USMCA, started to put trade deals out that were either much more balanced or were much more favorable to the United States, including requirements that the Mexican government pay their workers a living wage, a deterrent to having the illegal immigration come this direction. Now, before we talk too much further about the wall and how it plans to be funded, I do want to talk a little bit about illegal immigration in this country and what the wall would mean to it. there is a stark difference between what people actually believe illegal immigration is and what it really is. There is a vast belief out there that illegal immigration is almost exclusively people coming up to the border and jumping across. While the border jumping is a problem and it does need to be discussed in this country, and it's part of the reason that we need to think about having an actual physical barrier into this country, there are studies out there that show that the vast majority of illegal immigration actually comes down to people who are coming here legally on a visa, which would be either a work visa or a student visa, and just overstaying the expiration of the visa. The immigrants are actually entering this country legally through a port of entry or through another legal means, coming to do the work that they came here to do or go to school, and then just staying after the stamp on their visa is up. And that is a big problem. That's something that I talked a little bit about when I talked about DACA and what we do about DACA once it's ending. That video will also be linked in the description below. With that in mind, building the wall is not going to curb that illegal immigration, but what it would do, I think, would be a symbol for people that there is an actual border to this country that needs to be respected. And one of the other potentials that comes from putting a 2,000-mile edifice across our southern border is the fact that this edifice does have the potential to be built onto. What the majority of Trump supporters are seeing when they see the wall is just a 2,000-mile edifice of flat gray concrete that is tall enough that people can't climb over it, thus sidestepping a point of entry. But there is more potential that we can do with it. Having a freestanding edifice means that you can start putting other buildings into it, and you can start having offices all along the border with one wall of them already being built. A central place where ICE agents can gather, do their paperwork, and really be proud of when they go to work in there. And this also raises a lot of other potential for immigration and the immigration crises that have preceded this. Anybody who's been following the life of Donald Trump before and up to and even while he is in the presidency knows that Donald Trump is a big fan of the concept of go big or go home. And with a 2,000-mile wall freestanding along our southern border, we do have the opportunity to check off another box that's come into play in immigration policy as we've been going along. With a long border wall all across our southern border, and the idea that we've already had about putting offices up and along this wall for people from the Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement to do their work, we also have the potential to build facilities in which families can stay together while they are awaiting processing as they're coming through and seeking asylum, whether they're doing it legally or illegally. Simply put, we have a president right now who is in the hotel business. He's made his name off of hotels, and he continues to have hotels around the world. So why not take some of that ingenuity and some of the know-how that came from being in the hotel and hospitality business and use that integrated into the wall along our southern border? For the most part, with a wall being there and it being very difficult for people to cross the wall without getting caught or going through a port of entry, there's no need to treat the people that do come through in the port of entry seeking asylum as criminals as the people who have sidestepped the ports of entry and just walked across the fence. Therefore, it would not be hard to have a series of facilities with one wall already being built at the wall itself where people can come in, get a warm meal, get a warm bed, and actually have a place to stay while their asylum cases are being reviewed. And as long as we're going that far, it probably wouldn't be too hard to get a judge's office in each of these facilities and start to expedite the process. The president said that we were going to have the Great and Glorious Wall, and it was going to have a great big door in it. And I think the ideas that I have put forward in this makes this a reality and makes the great big door a more welcome sign to people who do want to come in to this country the right way and for the right reasons. Offering them the hospitality as soon as they cross the border would mean that they wouldn't feel the need to try and sidestep anything. Unfortunately, not all of the asylum applications are going to be accepted. That's going to be a fact of life, and some of the people that are coming here seeking asylum are going to be turned away back to their own countries. But if they're coming here, they're poor and they're huddled, and we cannot house them for whatever reason the judge would have to not house them. We can at least get them here for a few days, get them in a warm bed, get them cleaned up, and get them a few warm meals before we turn them back, for the reasons that the judges would have to turn the asylum seekers back. Now, it's understandable that the ideas that I have put forward would raise the cost of the wall tremendously. However, with the ideas that I've put forward, it would also be very hard for the opponents of Donald Trump to oppose the immigration agenda of putting a wall up without it being completely ideological and without it being simply for the fact that he has an R next to his name. But the idea of the cost is going to come up, and it's something that's already come up, and it is something else that I have thought to discuss. I got the idea to make this video because I was listening to Matt and Blonde's stream. I was listening back on the audio because I had missed the live stream. But as I was listening, one of the opening points that Blonde brought up was the fact that now we are in the 2020 election season and there is no wall built. Matt and Blonde discussed back and forth about the idea, and they talked about privately funding the wall or having a private builder come in and build it, which I don't believe would be illegal. If I am not mistaken, the executive office would have to fund or at least partially fund any sort of edifice that would be for Border Patrol or any other Border Patrol measure. I might be wrong on this. If I am wrong, please correct me in the comment section below. But the other idea that Blonde had was the fact that we could put up a massive GoFundMe across the country. The American populace seems to be very warm to the idea of paying for the wall out of their own pockets, donating money to the government to do so. Unfortunately, I don't think a GoFundMe is the way to go. There's no law against you giving money to the government, but there's also no real good way to do it. Additionally, with such a large sum that would come from a GoFundMe from across the country and the opposition to our president, it would only take one good lawyer to find a way to spin this into a political bribe, to turn this into a constitutional crisis and something that we're talking about in the news for weeks and months to come. In spite of all this, I do think that there is a way to raise the funding from the American people who do want the wall, without it violating any other laws, but it would take some work, possibly from the Congress, but definitely from the IRS and the Treasury. When I was researching for this video, I found that it's not expressly illegal for you to donate to the federal government. In fact, the Department of the Treasury has made a website for you to do just that. And of course, there's always been a U.S. savings bond in which you can make a loan to the government. The unfortunate side of both the Department of Fiscal Services and U.S. savings bonds is the fact that you have no say in where the money is going, and it's not going directly to the executive branch in order to build the wall. In fact, when you go onto the web page for the Department of Fiscal Services, you will see that the only two options that you have for donating money to the government would be to reduce the U.S. national debt or to just give a generic gift to the government for them to use as they see fit, which is an idea that I consider to be dangerous in all situations. I bring up self-funding on the wall because it's actually a popular idea among constituent Republicans across this country, as we can see in this meme that has been floating around ever since CNN first started saying that the wall was going to cost money on our side. CNN just released an article that read, Trump's wall could cost an estimated $120 to $150 per household. My questions: personal check or money order, and where do I send it? The trouble with memes like this is the fact that there really isn't a good place to send it, as we demonstrated by looking at the U.S. Bureau of Fiscal Services, the division of the Department of Treasury. But as I was thinking back to the taxes that I've paid to the state of Wisconsin, I started to realize that there is a way around this, and there is a way to put funding into the government and have it earmarked for a wall specifically, or essentially anything else that Steve Mnuchin wants to put onto the tax forms in the IRS in order to allot money the way that the citizenry of this country wants to see it allotted. This is a copy of the 2010 tax form for Wisconsin income tax, and I wanted to use this year specifically because of the items that I want to cite, and one of them being as divisive to parts of the people of my state as the wall is to people of this country. Let's scroll down and take a look. As we scroll down through the document, on the third page, we see a series of donations that you can use your income tax refund for, or you can add to the taxes that you owe to the state as you see fit. These donations are completely voluntary, and as I mentioned, they use the money that you would be getting back from the state after you've overpaid your taxes. And I wanted to cite the year 2010 because that was a year that still had the Green Bay Packers stadium donation on it. Obviously, people that are close to the Illinois or Minnesota border, or possibly people who are up by the UP border as well, would not want to put their money into Lambeau Field, instead putting their time, money, and effort into the Vikings, Bears, or Lions, depending on which team they support. And that is absolutely something that I understand. Therefore, there was the line because the Green Bay Packers are owned by the citizenry of the state of Wisconsin, in which you can put your money in and have it added to the stadium fund. But you don't have to. And all of the money that is on that line is earmarked specifically for the stadium, as well as the other charities that are listed along the same line. I understand the miles of red tape and bureaucracy that the IRS would have to go to if they were to change a form for the coming year in order to add a line like that for wall funding for the country. And there would be years combined of retraining for CPAs across the country in order to make sure that they understand how the line would work and how to assess it against people's taxes. With that being said, however, I do strongly feel with the sentiment in the country, especially a country that puts memes like the one that we looked at out there, that if we put that line on the 2018 taxes, we would have a majority of the funding ready to build the wall early in 2019. As far as taxes go, and I do believe this would be the fair solution, it would allow people to donate to the wall and put it against their taxes and make sure it got built, but the people that don't believe in the wall or don't want to see it get built or don't want to participate in it for whatever reason, or simply who can't afford it, would have the option not to put in for the wall. Therefore, only the people who really passionately wanted the wall would be able to put the money in, put their money where their mouths are, and get the wall built. And again, I do think there is enough support for the wall in this country to easily garner the $10 billion that CNN estimates that it would cost. I even think that we could raise enough of a surplus that we could institute some of these offices and asylum facilities for people along the way as well. But that would be a question for the American people as we went forward, and how much they wanted to put into the government in order to get what they really want out of it. What do you think about the idea of a border wall? Do you think it would work? Do you think it would help? Do you think it would stop anything? And do you think it's an actual effective use, or do you think it's just pure symbolism? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at Ed's Blog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.